and welcome to Stearns Stories, which is our new podcast here at the Stearns History Museum. Today, I am joined by Eric Cheever. Hey, Eric.
Hello.
The curator of collections, and we thought it'd be a good time to talk about beer. And Eric has a perfect setting for a discussion about beer.
Yeah, kind of sitting in the beer room here. So
Yeah, I didn't know you had a beer room. That's very cool.
everyone needs a beer room.
I should get one.
You should.
So I thought we had a Hops and History program in February that was called Monks and Moonshine. Feels like a lifetime ago at this point, but I thought it would be a good idea to maybe just present some of the highlights of that and some other Prohibition era stories in podcast form. So that's what we're going to do here today. And if Eric gets inspired by his surroundings, perhaps he can share that inspiration or those stories with us. But so I was inspired to do the Monks and Moonshine presentation because I've only lived in Stearns County for like a year and a half, and I kept hearing about how involved Stearns County was in Prohibition. But the angle that I found the most interesting that you can find in both the Minnesota 13 book and the movie was the involvement of not involvement so much as the monks and the Catholic Church not so much being involved, but not condemning this practice of making moonshine and that sort of thing. So that's what sort of led me to learn a little bit more about why monks and clergy or monks specifically, were so good at brewing beer and why they had such a connection to it, and how that fed into their willingness to help these moonshiners during the Prohibition age. So what do you know about Prohibition in Stearns County, Eric? I suppose you know a lot.
Well, Stearns County was kind of ground zero, sort of the epicenter for illegal alcohol production some people say in the United States. I mean, we had Minnesota 13, which was produced here, which, legend has it, you could travel to France, go to a bar in France and ask for Minnesota 13 and they would serve it to you.
Really?
So
do you think that's true?
Well, I mean, I've heard a number of stories where people claim that it's true. So
okay.
I can't be positive, but I'm sure that there is some basis of truth to it.
So what was it that made Minnesota 13 so spectacular? Why was it so popular that, gangsters from Chicago and New York were drinking it?
The quality of it. It was well made. So Minnesota, University of Minnesota had just produced a hybrid corn that they called, and quite a coincidence here, Minnesota 13. And it turned out that corn grew really well in shorter. It was designed to grow in shorter growing,
seasons,
in colder weather. How about that? So with the shorter growing season, and it turned out that it worked really well for moonshining. So there was a ready supply of product or ingredients, and also a ready supply of people ready to make it. This is a very German area. It was in the 1920s. There was a farm crisis. So farmers were losing their properties, and money was incredibly tight. And this offered a way for farmers to actually make some money, make a profit, and in a lot of cases save their farms. So people sort of jumped on the bootlegging bandwagon, basically to save their to create income and save their farms.
And so that ties into the whole church being not approving of it. But there are stories of monks, making stills, or monks being more directly involved in making moonshine than maybe they would like people to know. Do you have any of those stories? Do you have any inside info? I know you live in Cold Spring, so.
Well, there's a number of stories of monks actually teaching people how to make moonshine. I mean, the Catholic Church did not look down upon the consumption of alcohol, and it was ingrained in the German culture. So there was they thought, the monks at least thought it was kind of crazy to have a country go dry. So they had no they had no compunction about teaching people how to produce booze for
Right.
themselves, and also they felt like they were helping people by allowing them to create an income, um, and save their farms, like I said before. So
Yeah, so I was very interested in learning about the long history of monks and the brewing of not just beer but wine, going all the way back to the Middle Ages, where monks had a lot of time to perfect certain crafts. And with the rule of Saint Benedict, I don't know if everybody knows what the rule of Saint Benedict, but that came about, written by Saint Benedict in the 6th century AD. It's kind of the foundation of Western monasticism. But the whole thing is you work and you pray, and by performing manual labor, you're sort of honoring God in that way. And so they part of what they did for work was to brew beer, or create wine, and it just became this ingrained in their identity, especially in Europe, places like France, and Belgium and that sort of thing. And so, it just became a huge part of their identity. And now over here, even today, you see labels on beer and wine, and you see monks with red cheeks and drinking their beer and their wine. It's still such a ingrained part of their, at least perceived identity. And so I just thought that was so interesting, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about why that was. But the answer was actually pretty simple. It was just, a way for them to be self-sufficient. There's still certain monasteries that are the best brewers in the world, some would say. And it makes sense that alcohol was so tied to their culture, that this random 10-year, 12-year span in America where it was outlawed, why would they think anything of it and actually listen and stop participating in alcohol? You know what I mean?
yeah, I found it sort of interesting too that you look at the two surviving traditional breweries in Minnesota, Shell's down in New Ulm and Cold Spring, and I don't know that it's a coincidence that both of those surviving breweries, are in the most German towns, two of the most German towns in America. Probably not much of a coincidence.
No, I wouldn't think so. It's just, when you think about it, Prohibition was a blip on the radar. I mean, how long was it? 12 years? 13
Yeah,
years?
yeah, 1920 to 1933.
Yeah, so it really wasn't that long. And Western monasticism has been around for over 1,000 years, so
Yeah,
it doesn't really track that the monks would, just because it's illegal for now. Like the thing that they said so much in the Minnesota 13 book and movie is that it was illegal but not immoral, especially when you're
yeah,
helping people, like you said, keep their farms and not go into complete poverty, which was a real possibility if they didn't have that option.
very true. Yeah, and people did.
Yes. So I know you have some fun stories about Prohibition in Stearns County, certain gangsters that may have been around, or certain fires that have happened. Do you want to talk about some of those stories a little bit?
Well, there's a ton of stories. I mean, some of the interesting ones, I think, revolve around some of the breweries in Stearns County, and there was a number of breweries. I mean, this was a very German town, or very German county, as we had mentioned. Uh, so there was, I don't have the list right in front of me, but we had breweries in Melrose and Sauk Center, number in St. Cloud, Cold Spring, Richmond, St. Joseph. So many German towns with German breweries. Um, they didn't all go out of business in Prohibition. A number of them did, but you figure if you're a business person, supply and demand, you have a facility that's set up to create something that people want. I mean, the idea that it might be illegal didn't slow everybody down. There was stories that, well, I mean, I guess we have to call them stories because there's concrete proof in a couple of instances. So the Pitzel Brewery up in New Munich, according to the newspapers, It was a pretty big brewery at the time. Prohibition came along, and according to the newspapers, they claimed to make nothing but malt. Um, until the federal agents came up there and found that their malt ended up being brewed into beer, and the beer being put in bottles, and then the bottles were being sold. So they got busted a number of times. The last time that they got busted, a couple federal agents dressed as farmers from North Dakota on a road trip stopped to buy beer at the brewery, bought beer, brought it down, and said, "All right, we have evidence that they're brewing beer. Here it is." So they got a warrant and raided the property, set up a sting, and waited until a Cadillac touring car and a couple trucks showed up. And they ended up, they waited until they loaded up the trucks, and then as the trucks took off, the agents chased the trucks. And during the chase, there was a gun battle. They were actually shooting at each other, just like a gangster movie, right?
Yeah.
One of the agents jumped off of the chase car onto the truck. One of the guys on the truck hit him with a pole and knocked him off. And they're going 50 miles an hour down the road. Well, he cracked his skull when he fell.
Oh
And so that kind of put, everyone just stopped, because if he died, everyone involved in the raid could have been charged for manslaughter. So it turned out to be a pretty big deal. And then it turned out that the people involved in the raid were, one, the county commissioner, and a number of the leading businessmen in Stearns County at the time. So there was a lot of attention paid to the recovery of this agent. He did eventually recover, and the people involved in the bootlegging were fined something like $300 because they were such prominent citizens. They basically were let off.
wow.
So that was kind of the Stearns County. The closest Stearns County came to a big Chicago style gangster raid.
They should do
Dillinger
like
was.
a dramatic reenactment of that. Maybe we
I
could
know,
film
you
something
could.
like that once things pick up again.
I know, it's true. You'll have
That's
to come up with
intense.
yeah, it's true. I'd have to come up with some pretty neat vehicles for that one, though.
Yeah, it might be hard to come across.
But
I
that'd
don't
be
know though. You seem to have a lot of old-timey vehicles.
Oh, we can find something.
Yeah.
So, Dillinger was rumored to be up here quite a bit. There was stories that he had a girlfriend who lived in St. Cloud.
Okay.
So he spent a fair amount of time up here. There's an account of him stopping and talking to kids along Old Highway 15.
Really?
Yeah.
Just random kids,
He
or like
stopped
kids
some
who were
kids walking
involved
home
in
from
the.
school, and he pulled up.
Keep going. I'm sorry.
They were just walking home from school, and he saw them. And this is according to the kids. Obviously, when they got older, this was in the 20s. But he rolled down his window and he said, "Hey kids, you know who I am?" And they looked at him and he said, "I'm public enemy number one." And then he peeled out and went up to a speakeasy up the road.
Why would he make
I
his
don't know.
whereabouts known? That's so.
I have no idea. I mean, it's a story. It's, is it
That's
true?
the thing with these prohibition stories, is that, this activity was mostly illegal, so there's like not a lot of record of it. So you have to rely upon hearsay and stories and stuff like that, especially when it comes to any type of involvement of the monks. They certainly did not have any recorded involvement in any of this stuff.
Sure.
But there are stories of, what is the church that was supposedly paid for with moonshine?
I think that was in Holdingford, wasn't it?
Could be. I don't have the name in front of me, but yeah, there's stories like that. Like, these priests and monks were selling moonshine to build new churches and stuff like
Sure.
that, or like hiding the moonshine in the altars and that sort of thing. And someone at our Hops and History program told the story of nuns working as like transpo, like transporting the moonshine to wherever it needed to go, because who's going to stop the nuns, right?
Right. I think there's other ways around brewing alcohol as well. I think this is, I get a kick out of this. So
What's that?
this is a bottle of Cold Spring Red Star Tonic, which became very popular during Prohibition. It's healthful and palatable, this one was dated, let's see, June 26, 1929. And it was for medicinal use only, a malt tonic brewed for medicinal use only.
And what sort of ailments would a malt tonic cure?
Whatever beer does, I don't know.
Okay.
So basically, this was beer.
Yeah.
It was a thicker version, of kind of a low alcohol version of beer, but it is beer, and it was legally produced for medicinal use only
By Cold Spring?
by Cold Spring. Yeah, for stomach ailments and such.
Yeah, I mean, what helps a stomach ailment better than some beer, right?
Exactly. So, yeah, there were ways around it. Creative labeling, creative marketing.
This is true. Do you have any other crazy Prohibition era stories?
Well, I like the idea of Brother Justice from St. Ben's building stills, and
Yeah,
we don't know how many he built, but he built stills for farmers.
right, because a lot of them were making lead-lined stills, right? And that was
Yep.
dangerous, and it would obviously hurt the beer, I would think.
Yeah, that is
But
not
really,
good.
yeah, so he was helping them out by, was he selling them or was he just giving them to people?
I have not heard one way or another. I don't know if people hired him to create stills for them, or if he did it out of the kindness of his hearts. I don't know.
Again, there's not going to be a record of something like that. But what I think is interesting is there was this whole like resurgence of interest in the Prohibition in Stearns County with the book and then later the movie. But there is a
Yeah.
whiskey, right, called Minnesota 13 that you can get, but there's also an alcohol, I don't know exactly what it is, called Brother Justice too. So the legacy lives
Yes.
on with these Stearns County bootleggers or
It
people
does.
that helped.
Yeah. Well, in Cold Spring Brewery for years, through the 70s and I believe into the 80s, had a beer called Minnesota 13,
Oh, well,
which
that
is,
makes sense.
yeah, which I think is kind of more creative marketing.
Definitely. So I am just sitting here looking at all the beer cans that you have. Do you just want to tell a little bit about why you're into collecting these beer cans?
Because I was a child of the late 70s, I guess.
That doesn't seem like sufficient explanation.
Well, when I was a kid, when I was 13, 14 years old, that was the thing to do. Everyone went out and started collecting beer cans. They had the Schmidt Scenic series with the ducks and the geese and stuff, and that's what we did. We went outside, and it was every generation's got its fad, correct?
Yeah.
That was ours, and excuse me, we as adults, many of us still have
Still do
collections.
it.
And they just became a bit more sophisticated, as opposed to finding things in the road for free. Now people are spending thousands of dollars on items.
So what is your favorite beer can that you've ever found?
Uh,
Or rarest or one that you like the best?
that's that is a very difficult one.
Okay.
It changes by the day. I mean, these are kind of cool from St. Cloud.
Oh, the St. Cloud Brewing Company?
Yeah, in fact, yeah, we had just talked about that in
In our,
stories of our stuff, right?
yep.
So these were some of the last bottles of beer. I don't know if it shows up very well on there, that came out of the St. Cloud Brewery before it went out of business.
When
So,
Bubbles
but
messed it up.
Bubbles was involved. In fact, we're going to have to do a little bit of research on Bubbles, because we've had a lot of questions about him.
It's just funny that someone would be named Bubbles and they'd run a beer company. I just think
It's
that's
true. I mean, his real name was Florian,
Oh, yeah.
and Bubbles obviously was his nickname. It was not his given name.
I wouldn't think so, but
But it is apropos. If you
yeah,
think
no,
about
it very much is.
it.
So, do you have anything else to add about the Prohibition stuff, the monks and moonshine? It seems like forever ago that we had that Hops in History. That was
Oh, I
only the
know.
end of February, but it was a really fun one, and we
It
had
was.
a lot of good conversation. We had some really cool artifacts out, including a still. We have a few stills in our collection, right?
Yeah, I think that my favorite still, though, the one that seemed to get the most attention was the still that was smashed up with axes. I find it interesting that and off the top of my head, being as we're not at the museum right now, we can't go look up the information on it. But I can't remember the original owner, but they were raided right at the very tail end of Prohibition,
Oh.
in early '33, and Prohibition was over in April of '33. But it was still illegal to brew your own hooch until just recently, actually.
Yeah, wasn't it like the 80s or the
Yeah, I
90s?
believe '80s or '90s even.
Yeah. So one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about at the Hops and History that I thought was interesting was the Tin Man thing. Do you want to explain a little bit what the Tin Man thing is?
Oh, from Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
You're talking.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, he was based on a still.
Yeah. His appearance in the movie
Yeah.
was based off a moonshine still. And when you see one, you can totally envision what inspired it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly. I think it's great.
yeah, I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit that I never would have thought of. But when you think about when that movie was made, 1939, it makes quite a bit of sense. So
It very much does. Yeah, that was in 1939. Prohibition was just yesterday.
yeah, yeah, it was not that long ago.
Yeah,
People still
that
had
was
pretty fresh memories of it. Um, so anything else to add about Stearns County and Prohibition? I know it was kind of the hub in Minnesota for bootlegging, right? Was there any other place in America that was as prolific in bootlegging as Stearns County?
well. Most places had some bootlegging activity. Stearns County became the most famous for it, though. I mean, we're still talking about Minnesota 13,
Yeah,
and you go to basically any historian or that studies 20th century American history, and they will be aware of Minnesota 13 and the role that Stearns County played in that time period.
I think that's so interesting because I went to graduate school here like 10 years ago and I never
Hmm.
knew about that. And I didn't learn about it until I moved here to work at the museum. So it was a whole new world that was opened up to me. And I just think it's fascinating.
Well, just like we were just talking about the monks. I mean, it's not a story that many people in Stearns County speak of freely. In fact,
Hmm.
a lot of families still will not talk about their ancestors' involvement in the era. People are still very tight-lipped about it.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about if they lived through it, I mean, if they spoke about it, there was a chance they were going to get raided and their income and their livelihood would be completely destroyed.
Yeah,
They didn't know that it was going to come to an end in 1933, and even if it was, I mean, it was still around for 12, 13 years. So it was dangerous to mention it. And I suppose that just gets kind of, you know, beaten into your head. And so you never maybe get to a point where you think it's okay to talk about.
true. And a lot of people ended up in Leavenworth, and generally people are not proud to be sent to prison. It's not something that you want to go out and tell your friends and relatives about.
It's true. That's what I think. Another part that's so interesting is that the local law enforcement was pretty hesitant to turn people in, which is why it was always the feds that were coming in and raiding and destroying stills and that sort of thing.
Yeah, a lot of the local law enforcement actually would tip off bootleggers.
Well, yeah, because I mean, Stearns County for the most part is pretty rural and has, relatively small towns with the exception of St. Cloud. So, everyone kind of knows each other and wants to look out for each other. So it makes
Yeah,
sense.
it was very much an extended family.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Yeah, it does very much.
So I don't know if you have anything more to add. Should we try to wrap it up here?
I suppose we could.
So it makes me want beer. I know it's only 10:30 in the morning, but the conditions being what they are, you
True,
know,
true, true.
beer couldn't
Yeah,
hurt. But I know a lot of our local breweries are delivering and stuff. Pantown Brewery is open for pickup and delivery. They help us out with our hops and history, which is always really fun. If you We didn't get to do our trivia in March, obviously. So if you want to do an online version of that trivia, you can just go to our YouTube page, or you're there if you're watching this. So just click on the video. It's pretty fun trivia. It's all over the place. It's not just local history. It's a mix of categories and stuff. So If you're bored at home this weekend, you need something to do, order some Pantown, play some trivia, and just have some fun. Because we could all use that right now, right?
That sounds like an excellent plan.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of Stearns Stories. Next week, we have a special guest. It'll be an interesting conversation, so we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Bye.